Okay, so we're going to be reviewing the beginning of the Pétain DBQ. It's the one on Vichy, France. Okay, so as usual, we want to look at the question, make sure we understand the question, the situation. Now, there are times when you'll get a DBQ, and it's about something you don't really remember too much about. For this, you need to put it into context and need to think, okay, what's going on around this time? Obviously, this is from the World War II period. So you need to think, oh, what happened to France? Oh, they've been dominated. Hitler moved through, and the south of France remains independent. That's what we'll be looking at, whereas the north is occupied by the Germans. And then, of course, you want to read the background. Usually there's something about the background that comes up later on, right? For this, if you don't read the background, you don't really even understand that Pétain is the new prime minister. And so you need to make sure you read the background and you understand exactly what happened. Note that Pétain is condemned to death as a result of his leadership of Vichy, France, and as is his prime minister, who actually is executed. Pétain dies in prison, not with execution. So we want to read so that's the stakes here, right? If you're on the wrong side of this debate, you are going to prison or being killed. And so obviously this is going to be very controversial. And so after reading that, we're looking at the question, how did people view the regime? How did people view the Vichy regime? Okay, that's our question. So we want to identify a couple, oh, they viewed it well, they viewed it negatively. How did Pétain view it? How did, and think of the usual possibilities. How did foreigners view it? How did women view it, perhaps? How is it perceived? And so that's what we want to look at. So even going in, we can think, oh, these are potential groupings I want to be on the lookout for. Also, don't neglect the map, right, which helps you sometimes figure out exactly what it is, right? If we look at this map, the northern part is obviously controlled by the Germans, and the southern part is the now unoccupied zone that Pétain and the Vichy government will control. And what is Vichy? It's a city right there in that unoccupied territory. It will be the capital now of France, because Paris is occupied by the Germans. Okay, so let's look now at document 1. Well, when we look at this document, it comes early, 1940, which is the beginning of the period, and it comes from Philippe Pétain, the French prime minister, in his radio address. So it's coming from Pétain himself, the man who will become the leader of this government. And so he's calling out to Frenchmen. And he begins by, now remember our question is, well, what are people's views of the government? That's what we want to be thinking about when we're looking at these documents. How do people view the government? So Pétain begins by looking at saying that it's honorable what the French have done so far in World War II. Right? It's 1940, France has been invaded, and the Germans have conquered it, and now he's saying, well, this has been honorable. We have fought with heroism. And he notes that France has fulfilled our obligations towards our allies. So by fighting, they have fulfilled their obligations. And then he says, but now I want to give you, in his words, the gift of my person to relieve France's suffering. So he thinks that he can deliver France from the suffering that Germany has delivered. And he says, how will this happen, this deliverance from suffering? By stopping fighting. And so he says, combat must cease, and therefore, the French must concede to the Germans. And note, well, how does this have to deal with the government? In his opinion, you could say, well, this is an example. In this case, he thinks the government is helping France. The government is, benefiting the French people to end suffering in France. That's why we need this government. He calls for support from the people and calls for faith in the destiny of the fatherland. He says that this is the best thing for France. So certainly he is, grounding his new government in what's best for the French people, in his opinion. Now, obviously, the point of view is really, I think, straightforward. He's going to be the new leader. He is giving a radio address. So he is obviously trying to reach out for popular support. He's delivering a hard message to the French, and that message is, we lost to the Germans, we need to concede, and the Germans have won. So note how he sugarcoats that message by saying that we have fought with heroism, and we've fulfilled our obligations, and now we need to have faith in the destiny of our fatherland. He's attempting to get public support for his new regime. His tone is positive in order to do that. He's using grand rhetoric to suggest that this is what France needs. And so that's our point of view here. Document 2 is also from Pétain. This is from a couple months later, from June to October. And as you can see, Pétain, when we read this document, he says that the disaster, which was the defeat by Germany, the defeat of France by Germany, that disaster, in his words, reflected the weakness of the old regime. And that old regime, if you remember, was the Third Republic of France. And so he continues that, therefore, we must rebuild France. That's the goal, and to create a new order in France. So as you can see, he's calling for change, and he's saying that France is entering a new era, and that it will be different from the old era. And so once again, what is his opinion of the government? Going back to the question, right, which we want to think. How did he view the regime? Well, he views his regime as an opportunity for a new start. He views his regime as a way to rebuild France. So this might be a paragraph. We certainly can put document 1 and 2 together in a paragraph together and say, look, these are both from Pétain. They're both early in the conflict, and they both suggest that Pétain has optimism about this new government and that it's a potential that it will benefit France. And note the same point of view applies here. Now, when you're doing point of view, you don't want to repeat the exact same thing. So if you did point of view and said the first one was an attempt to get power, you should say it again for document 2, but you don't want every single point of view to merely be, oh, he's attempting to get power. Maybe try to change it a bit. At this point, 4 months after the defeat, you almost get the sense that his footing is getting a little sturdier. He's no longer talking about the war and the sort of bad condition France is in, but he's saying now he's talking about the future. He's talking about this new order that he'll be establishing. So maybe you'll note that in your point of view, that this is an attempt to explain his vision and to get people to buy into that vision. So that's the point of view you can do here too, but once again it's the same thing as before. He's the leader, he's attempting to gain power, he's using the radio in order to do this.